Alright everybody, this is Mr. K, and today I'm going to be discussing the anatomy of the brain with you. So this is the order that I'm going to discuss the brain today. The first part I'm going to talk about is the cerebrum, which is this highly folded area up here towards the top. The next area of the brain I'm going to talk about is the diencephalon. It is composed of the thalamus and the hypothalamus, as well as an unlisted area called the limbic system. But I'll tell you more about that later. The next part of the brain I'm going to talk about is the brainstem, and is made up of 4 different areas. You have the midbrain, the pons, the medulla oblongata, and then the 4th area we're going to talk about for the brainstem is this area called the reticular formation. And the last part of the brain that I'm going to talk about is this cauliflower-looking area down here called the cerebellum. I'm going to continue discussing the cerebrum now, but before I do, I want to talk about why I drew an earth over here to the left. So this is a not well drawn picture of the earth, but the earth has an imaginary line that runs through the middle of it called the equator, and it divides the earth into 2 different hemispheres. That is why we call Australia the land down under, because it's the only country completely underneath the equator in a real map. Mine does not do that fact justice, but anyway, the reason I tell you that is because the brain is also divided into 2 hemispheres, a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere, and those hemispheres are connected by a structure called the corpus callosum. Alright, do you see these lines right here in the cerebrum? So these are grooves and ridges, okay? Kind of think of a mountain range like I have over here to the left, okay? So the tops of those mountains are called gyri, and the bottom of those mountains are called sulci. So the gyri would be ridges, and the sulci are grooves that make up the cerebrum, and that's why all those lines are there, okay? The cerebrum has 4 lobes, which correspond to the skull bone that they lie under. Those 4 lobes of the cerebrum are the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. The surface of the cerebrum is called the cerebral cortex, and is made up of a special type of brain tissue called gray matter. It can be divided into motor, sensory, and association areas. As you can see here, we have motor areas, association areas, as well as sensory areas. So, those different areas, the sensory areas interpret sensory inputs such as feelings or sensations. The association areas analyze and interpret sensory impulses, and then the motor areas can be seen here as Broca's area, the motor speech. Alright, I'm going to move on now to the diencephalon. The diencephalon lies between the cerebral hemispheres and above the midbrain, which is right here. Some areas of the diencephalon, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and then we're also going to talk about the limbic system. So the thalamus right here, its job is it functions in sorting and directing sensory information that is arriving from other parts of the nervous system. The hypothalamus, which is underneath the thalamus, maintains homeostasis by regulating the heart and rate and blood pressure. So it regulates heart rate and blood pressure. It also regulates body temperature and water balance. It controls movements and secretions of the digestive tract, and it also helps regulate sleep patterns. The limbic system, which is not necessarily a structure you can find, but it's a group of neurons that controls emotional experience and expressions by generating pleasant or unpleasant feelings about the experiences. Alright, next I'm going to talk about the brainstem. The brainstem is the bridge in between the brain and the spinal cord. It is composed of 4 major areas. The first, the midbrain right here, sends impulses to and from higher parts of the brain. The next area, the pons, number 2, contains centers that regulate the rate and depth of breathing. The medulla oblongata, number 3, transmits all ascending and descending impulses between the brain and spinal cord. It contains neurons that make up the cardiac center, which controls heart rate, the vasometer, which controls blood pressure, the respiratory center, which controls rate and depth of breathing. The medulla oblongata is also associated with coughing, sneezing, swallowing, and vomiting. The next area of the brainstem we're going to talk about is the reticular formation, which is a group of neurons located throughout the brainstem. Decreased activity in the reticular formation results in sleep, while increased activity results in wakefulness. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the cerebellum. The cerebellum is located beneath the occipital lobe. It functions to integrate information about the position of body parts, coordinates skeletal muscle activity, and maintains posture.